So now that we finished the outside of the purse, we're moving to the inside. The next step is step number 12, and it has to do with the front and back facing, which is piece number 7. And this is in your main fabric. It's not a lining piece. And step number 12 is basically folding down the top of your handles, folding it down about 1/4 of an inch. You're going to fold it, press it, and I've got the pins in there. I will be taking the pins out soon, but I just like to keep that down. So that is step number 12. Okay, our next step has to do with piece number 8, which is the front and back lining. So this is your lining piece. You are going to take piece number 8 and pin it to the bottom of number 7. So it will look like this. So go ahead and sew both of those, both sides, because you've got 2 of those. Make sure it's right side to right side before you sew it. Go ahead and do that now. Okay, I have sewn piece number 7 to 8, and I also went ahead and ironed down the seam allowance on those pieces. It just helps make it lay flat anyway, but go ahead and iron the seam allowance down if you haven't done so already. This outdoor fabric does get poofy if you don't iron it down. So step number 14 actually says to edge stitch the seam allowance down. So what you're going to do is on the wrong side, just go ahead and stitch right along the seam allowance so it does hold that down. And you do that on both sides. Okay, I've edge stitched my seam allowance down so you can see that on the blue part, at least right here. And now we are basically going to do the same thing to the side facing and side lining. So you've got the side facing, which is piece number 9. Oh, and look at that. I did this wrong. So there you go. This is what happens when you don't pay attention. So this is the correct one. This is the side facing number 9 to the side lining of number 10. You're going to pin those, make sure they're the right side so that it doesn't look like this. And go ahead and sew. And then you're going to iron the seam allowance down again and edge stitch the seam allowance. Okay, now that we've got all the sides to the lining and the inside done, we are going to sew them together just like we did on the outside. You're going to pin the 7 and 8 piece to the 9 and 10 piece. Now, something that I recommend doing, pin it. Here's the thing, you've got this seam here on both sides, and you really do want to try and make that match up on the inside. Even though it will be on the inside, it looks good if this seam right here matches up. So what I do is I pin it at that point, and then I do a little baste stitch right here. Then I open it up, make sure it looks right, and then go and sew it. That way, more often than not, you think you've matched up the 2 lines, you sew it, and one of the lines is off a little bit. So if you baste it right here and it doesn't look good, you can pull the baste stitch out real easily and do it again. So go ahead and do that on all 4 sides of your lining. And again, make sure it's right side to right side. So I went ahead and basted this little part here and opened it up, and it was off a bit. So I took out those seams and redid it, and it's matching up now. So now I'm going to pin it and sew. And again, this is the same thing as with the front or the outer part. You want to sew from the large circle to large circle. So end at about 1/2 inch from each end. Okay, I've sewn all 4 pieces of my lining and facing together. Now you're going to do the same thing with your bottom piece number 6 and sew, pin it on and sew it all the way around. Okay, so I have sewn the bottom onto my lining, and I'm going to turn it right side out again and check it, see how it looks. When I cut out piece number 6, it was a little smaller than what this bottom was supposed to be, you know, just because of the pattern piece. And so I had to kind of bunch it up in the corner to make it fit. But it looks like all of my corners are good. So there you go. So I've got the lining all done. Now we are going to sew the lining to the purse. One thing I forgot to mention and forgot to do, when you sew the lining, the bottom onto the lining, you are supposed to leave one side open. This is where you stick your cardboard or your plastic mesh. So guess what I get to do now? Seam rip. Okay, in order to sew the lining to the purse, you actually have to turn your lining back so it's wrong side out. Take your lining and then take your purse with the right side, just regular purse, stick the purse inside the lining. So you have got, let me see if I can show you. You've got the right side of your purse. You've got the right side of your purse up against the right side of your lining. So your lining is inside out, your purse is right side out. You stick your purse into the lining. Then you are going to sew along both edges from one end to the other, from basically the big dot to the big dot. You're also going to sew up one side of your strap. Then you're going to sew the center part of your strap, the other side of your strap, the other side, and then do the same thing on this side. So go ahead and do that. Make sure you keep the top of your strap open, and you're not going to want to combine any of these stitches. You want to stop at each point. Okay, I have sewn my lining to my purse, and it's a big mess. There's thread everywhere, but basically up on these handles, you sew it through the little folded down area. So I don't know if you can see that. I sewed it up the side here and stopped right about there. Now you're going to turn your purse inside or right side out. One other thing, my handles totally did not match up. You see that? This was piece number 7 and this was the main piece number 2. So I wanted to make sure though, you need to make sure your handles match up in size because they will be matching up when you turn it right side out. So I followed the wider part, which was piece number 2, on both sides. So my seam allowance is smaller in certain areas where piece number 7 was a little thin. I cut it a little too thin, but I made sure my 2 handles do match up in size. So just make sure you don't cut a handle too short, because then when you turn it right side out and you match these up to sew, one handle will be way smaller than the other. It's happened to me before. So go ahead and flip it around. Okay, I have turned my purse right side out. You see the pockets. So now comes the difficult part. In the instructions, first off, the straps run like this. So you've got your loop here. The 2 straps coming up are connected at the top here. This is the place I always have trouble. The instructions say to sew the rough edge. You know, you've got the 2 sides where it's folded over. Sew the rough edge, flip it over, and you're supposed to stick the seam allowance inside the folded over part that you had ironed. Never, ever works for me. So what I do, I take the right sides, so you've got your straps, put it right side together. I sew it back and forth 4 or 5 times because this is where you want it really tight. It's a big mess right here. So then what I do is I serge this top part here, flip it over, and then I sew the seam allowance, the serged seam allowance down. So all those folded over edges that we did are just hidden somewhere. And then I did the same thing over here. it's never worked the way the instructions say for it to do. You just need to make sure it's tight, it's strong, and there's no rough edges. So if you've got a serger, that's great. If you don't, then maybe use your zigzag stitch and sew down the seam allowance. If you're able to do what the instructions say, great. Let me know how that goes, because I almost got there at this time, but it just didn't work out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and we'll see how that looks. All right, I've got my handles sewn. I've trimmed them up as best as I could. You really want to make sure they're tight. Plus, you want to make sure they are the same height. So now the last step is to insert the bottom into piece number 6. Insert either your piece of cardboard or, like, I've got my plastic mesh. Now I have to cut this first though. Alrighty, so I have finished my purse. I got the plastic bottom in there. In order to get that in, I actually pulled out the bottom of the purse, slid in the plastic mesh, and I even slip stitched a couple corners to make sure it stays down. And then you sew the opening with a slip stitch and you're done. These purses are so cute. Like I said, you could use it as a baby bag, as a regular purse. I mean, you've got so many different openings. A craft bag, you're going scrapbooking or something. If you're going to the beach, a beach bag. Unfortunately, I don't get to use a beach bag here. Let's see. Actually, these pockets all fit wine glasses nice and easily. Stick some wine in there for a little picnic. So yeah, these bags are great. I know it says easy on the pattern. I think the hardest parts are definitely the finishing touches. The ends here, the handles, the bottom does get to be a pain trying to stitch that in. But other than that, I'd say it's pretty easy. I did have to use my seam ripper quite a few times, but then that's usually what happens. So I hope you really enjoyed making this with me. I would love to have I'd love to hear any comments that you've got, and I would love to see pictures of your finished product. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you soon.